My name is Victoria Fillmore. I'm from Tennessee. I am the owner of Cedar Hill Homestead, a bioregional apothecary. I am an herbalist, a food grower, a mom, a land, animal, and people steward. I want to take a minute, since I'm here on this land, to acknowledge the people that have stewarded this land for years, and I'd like to invite you to do the same. So with gratitude, I honor the Kaw people, Shawnee people, and the Osage people who first stewarded this territory. In our desire to learn from this land and work towards being better land stewards, we turn to a lot of their teachings. We'll go over that quite a few times today. So the premise of this class, to work with the land and not against it, is to walk your plant path with reverence and respect for its roots. So one of the terms that we're going to talk about today is ethnoecology. Is anyone familiar with that word? So ethnoecology is essentially looking to the past and seeing how people have always interacted with this land. And so we can really learn, looking back at that, things that didn't work, things that have worked for resource management, and just kind of take inspiration from that. So we are going to discuss the importance of building a relationship with the land and becoming a true land steward. Can I see who here is interested in herbalism in particular and farming? I know we've kind of got a little mix of both. Okay, so kind of both. So we will be applying this through a few terms. Ethnoecology, like I just mentioned, how the people of the very land that you interact with have always interacted with it, showing us how to work with the land and not against it. We will also talk about organolepsis. That's one of my favorite words. It is learning about a plant through experiencing it. So what that looks like for me is using your senses to learn from a plant. So if you've taken any herbal classes and they tell you to sit with a plant, to get to know it, that's really what they mean, is smell it, what does it feel like, is it growing near water, you could maybe take a nibble of it and see how it tastes. And if you've determined that it's safe, maybe try a tea with it. And then reciprocity, which is the ultimate goal, to live in a mutually beneficial relationship with your land. So to sort of explain this class, as an herbalist, I've lived on 2 pieces of land outside of the city that I've really learned from. These 2 pieces of land have allowed me to observe, listen, and gather information about them. I began to understand how we knew so much about plants and animals before technology gave us the ability to research and share. So what I mean by that is, through observing and witnessing the seasons change on my land, the different relationships between the plants and animals, I began to learn how a lot of these teachings that we have with both farming and herbalism have been not only been around forever, but all over the world. A lot of times when you're learning about herbalism in the past, you'll see that Ayurvedic medicine and Greek medicine and Chinese medicine all have discovered these like same concepts, and that was before we had computers and telephones. So when you really take the time to observe and just kind of witness the changes occurring on land, you really start to see how intuitive and simple it is to kind of come to some of these. So those 3 terms that I just shared are really just boiled down to observation and intuition. When I first got into herbalism, I realized that my knowledge, the way I was taught and how it was applied, was very different than my herbalist friends around the country. As I dug into the history of Appalachian folk herbalism, I learned that most of the remedies that we were using were a mix of slave medicine, indigenous medicine, and European settler medicine. This was largely missing from most of the herb schools that I attended and felt like such a large key piece to this knowledge. These remedies have survived decades for good reason. In fact, this knowledge was so sought after that in 1940, Rockefeller and Flexner took these teachings from Black and Native folks, butchered it horribly, taught it in schools that were expensive and only allowed white folks, and then they made it illegal to practice without a license. And a pretty interesting fact is that medical schools today are still based off of that Flexner report in 1940, which is just crazy to me that that hasn't been updated. And that's also where medical licensing came from, which of course now serves a purpose, but back then the main intention of it was to take these teachings away from the people that we got them from and sort of commercialize them and make money off of them. If we go even further back to the first people of this land, which I highly suggest that you do, there is so much to learn about the actual soil, the elevation, native plants, and resource management that is still pertinent today. If you're from around here in Kansas, my friend Farai recommends a book, Medicinal Wild Plants of the Prairie by Kelly Kishner. And the reason that we're recommending that book is because it's an old book. So what I have found is a lot of like newer herbalism books and even farming books, they kind of talk about the same plants and the same ideas. And if you find like old books, you get a lot of those like older teachings from the indigenous people of the land and just people that kind of learn more through trial and error than like practicing different trends that we're coming through. Even a lot of the farming tools that we use today are inspired by native designs. So many of these teachings are passed down orally, so spend as much time as you can in your local co-ops or seed exchanges trying to get to know people that have been in your area for generations. It's beautiful to reflect on what traditions have remained and which have changed. For example, Three Sisters Gardening. This is a very simple and long-lasting method of gardening that came through observing patterns of plant growth, observing something that was already occurring without our help. So just by simply looking at your plants that are growing and taking observation to the fact that when one is shading the other, it does better, or that your tomatoes or your beans can trellis on your corn. These are very simple but strong methods that have lasted through time because someone saw that. They saw that it was working and they told their friends about it. So, let me get to this one. Another school of thought that talks about this a lot is kincentric ecology. This is a beautiful term for how indigenous people view themselves as an extended kin to plants that share ancestry. We are owned by the land and not vice versa. To me, this is the goal of stewardship, to tend and be tended to. Us and the plants are both ruled by the sun, the moon, the rain, and the wind. The real teachings of the earth come from witnessing the seasons change, watching the native plants adapt to the more aggressive plants infiltrating their area, seeing what first-year mullein looks like next to 2-year, watching which plants support the most insects or animals, which ones do the animals tend to avoid, which ones always grow together. Does anyone have an example that they've been told just through word of mouth, a little gardening trick about like beneficial insects or companion planting or any kind of little things like that? Anybody? Has anyone ever used, I can't remember the exact name of it right now, but it's a type of lactic acid on their tomato plants to help with the, whatchamacallit, what are those big green bugs that we pick off of our tomatoes? Hornworms. So things like that, again, we're just learned through observation. Like, we get lactic acid through rotting fruit and any type of fermentation. Someone saw that that was keeping away insects, and now that's something that we buy in stores, and we can spray on our plants to get rid of hornworms. When we witness mutualism, symbiosis, and adaptation, we witness the sentience and resilience around us. We begin to feel deep inside that we once lived like the plants, inspired by the cycles of the moon, the cycles of the seasons, sun up, sun down, and the tides. And just by seeing this regularly, something literally wakes up inside of us, and we begin to be more influenced by these cycles once again, a part of our ecosystem. And this is when stewardship starts to come naturally. So to kind of break that down a little bit, when you spend time on one piece of land, whether that's the land that you live on or maybe a local park that you go to regularly, if you spend a full year there, you're going to see that land change season after season after season. And you're going to see which animals are nesting there what season, which insects are there in what season, what's growing. Something that I find really interesting too is seeing where plants grow. So I don't know if you all get in the fall goldenrod and ironweed. but those two grow together in Tennessee, and they tend to grow right where mountain mint and Monarda were growing in the summer. And what's really cool is after years of seeing that happen, I learned that there are chemical constituents in the mountain mint and Monarda that when they break down into the soil are very beneficial for the growth of goldenrod and ironweed. So when you start to, spend time in one place, you just see these things happen, and it becomes pretty intuitive to get kind of curious about it and wonder why that is. So that's really what we're talking about today, is just, it can be so fun to get every book that's out there and take courses and come to these awesome events and learn from other people. But the real magic, especially on your land, if you're learning from it with herbalism or farming, is to truly just witness what's happening. Just slow down, look at the birds, what are they eating, what plants are leaving their seeds for them, what mutual relationships are happening. Because you can really learn to work with those, with your farming and gardening. We apply this today. When you find your own piece of this world to inhabit, it can be tempting as an excited plant person to come in, eradicate what you may consider to be weeds, till the land, and start growing trees and plants in the ground. But compare that to meeting someone for the first time and then thinking that they have you all figured out. They start poking and prodding and trying to change you to meet their needs. To be a steward, we must honor that the land existed just fine without us and will outlive us, feeding many communities. It is crucial that we take time to learn the ethnoecology of our area. When we learn how the first people of this land managed its resources and how folks evolved with the land up until now, we learn so many valuable things. By witnessing the seasons on my land for a year, I learned the pathways of the rainfall, the grazing areas of the deer, turkey, and wild ducks. I saw the original location that we wanted for our garden was flooding every spring, and that all the tiny trees in our woods that no one had been removing were taking a lot of sunlight and nutrients from our big trees, causing them to weaken, and so on. So that is another really important thing, was a hard lesson that we had learned at our last house, was, you move in, you're all excited, you maybe even had a garden that you're transplanting, and you just kind of pick a spot because it's close to the house or it's convenient for you in some way. It can be so beneficial to just take some time to see what's happening on that land, because a lot of times the place that you've picked out for your garden or farm may not be the best. So, for example, with us, if we had just planted in this part that we had planned on, it would have been a disaster. We would have lost a lot of money to the flooding. We also started using the rainfall pathways through our woods. We kind of let them turn into natural trails. One of my favorite things to do is when you do lose big branches and leaves, you can start to kind of form the edges of those paths, and it helps keep them clear. My husband is a hunter, and so us finding out where the deer and the wild duck were nesting was important because we didn't want to bother them. So all of those things are super important. By talking to people in our area, we learned the best things to grow for erosion control on our hillsides and to help with flooding are native Appalachian sedge, beautiful native flowers like violets, asters, phlox, and bee balm. When applying this inherent knowledge, we can begin working towards reciprocity. Some ways that you can do that are livestock, composting, three sisters, and companion planting. Let me catch up here. So does anyone here homestead already? Do you have animals and food and grow? Awesome. Do you use, or do you work with your animals to give back to the garden and vice versa? What are some ways that you do that? Do you have any examples? It's okay if you don't want to share.
The straw and stuff from the coop, we put it in the garden, let it set for a year, and then we use it around the vegetables and stuff.
Yeah, that's very
good. And then what we don't use from the garden, the scraps and stuff go to be trees.
Yes, absolutely.
And in the winter, if I could get them to go in, maybe they would do what they're supposed to do in the garden, is scratch and eat everything, but this year it just hasn't worked yet, so I don't know.
Some of them get more spoiled than others.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add?
Well, I was just gonna say, we use ours to till new spots.
Yes.
You know, but you kinda have to keep them
I know, cause I just left the gate open thinking that they would just go in.
Yeah.
But then when I'm in the garden working like right now, planting, and left the gate open, you know, thinking they wouldn't come in, that's when they come in,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like,
Or especially if you put fresh seeds down, that's
yeah,
when they
I
really
thought I
like
should have
them.
done that, maybe in the winter, fed them in there a little bit, rain or something to keep them kind of, thinking they need to go back.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, so that's a great example, and depending on where you live, our last property was a very popular area for deer to bed, so even if we didn't have goats and chickens, we absolutely could have used their waste there to fertilize our garden. There's also a lot of great plants, like my friend Farai, who I'm staying with here, has a giant bucket of comfrey sitting in water, which is a great medicinal herb that's a phenomenal fertilizer for plants. And all you do is stick it in water and let it ferment and do its thing, yeah. So, yeah.
I was gonna say, for us, community is like a big part of why we homestead, and so I'm giving people chicken poop because I don't wanna go through the process of waiting a year, and then someone will give me rabbit poop, and then I can use that instantly.
Sooner, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think not only working with the plants and the animals, but also working with my community, you know, we share seedlings, we share seeds, that sweetens the pot.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a huge one, especially, in this day and age, a lot of homesteaders that I know, both people are working, there's children involved that need school, and so you sometimes get more ambitious than you actually have time. And, I see some areas have sort of like homesteading groups where one person may be really good at this, another person's good at this, and you kind of take turns going to each person's farm and doing a project for them. The poop thing is interesting because chickens, since they do not pee in a different area, their poop is too full of ammonia to use immediately in the garden. So you do have to let it sit for a while before it can be soil, though it is really good soil. But if you have, you know, any four-leggeds, any goats or deer, rabbits, anything like that, you can use their waste immediately in the garden, which is really nice. And of course, composting. I'm sure most of you here have at least heard a bit about composting, but you can give a lot of that to your garden, you can give a little bit of that to your animals. One thing that we like to do is we love birds, we love having the wild turkeys and the ducks on our land, so we will even leave stuff out for them, not just our chickens. And to what they were saying about using your chickens, since they scratch so much in your garden, and being able to keep them there, it can be a little hard, especially with like your spoiled layers. So what we started doing this year is we have our meat birds are separate, and they're in like a nice, easy, mobile thing, and so we can just plop them right on top of our garden beds and let them go to town. So that's a really nice thing to do. Is anyone here familiar with Herbal style planting? Okay, so that's a really great way to use your, kind of the waste that your land provides. So if you have more than a half acre, it can be really exhausting to deal with all the leaves and the twigs and everything that falls every storm. And if you either leaf blow or rake, you can start, you know, making piles of those and giving those back to the earth, but maybe in a place that you want them instead of all over the yard. So Herbal style beds are raised, which is great, especially for any root vegetables that you're wanting to grow. It makes them a lot easier to harvest. So you're just really building up your soil. And it does take a little while unless the branches that you're using have already been sitting and kind of starting to degrade a bit. But if they're brand new and fresh, you're gonna want them to sit and start to get soft and mushy and break down. Some people recommend a full year. I've been able to start using them more like 6 months. It's great in the winter. The winter is, you know, you've got all those fall leaves on the ground. You've got a lot of fallen branches from rainfall. And you have time before spring, so you can just kind of slowly start to bring all those things into your planting area and just kind of form them, or not. You know, if you have a garden bed or one big area, you really do want to kind of stick to like having your branches on the bottom, and then your leaves, and then your food waste, and then your wood chips. So just kind of making a layer in there. Maybe cardboard too, if something you deal with is a lot of weeds that you don't want around. So I mentioned the Three Sisters method earlier, and this is really just one example of so many styles of companion planting. And this is definitely something you can pick up a book and find different ways of companion planting. But I really think that if you are spending a lot of time on your land with your plants, you can really start to notice some of those beneficial relationships and beneficial insects. But the Three Sisters one is a classic. You have your corn, which provides the tall stalks for the beans to climb, and then you have those big squash leaves that provide shade and help retain moisture. So companion planting is not just, some plants are help each other, they fertilize each other, but also some can help ward off insects and animals that might be threatening to your tomatoes. We grow a lot of herbs since I'm an herbalist at home. So one thing that we love to do is in our contained beds is where our food is. And then outside of the contained beds, we grow things like mugwort, and mountain mint and monarda and any of those stinky things, rosemary, oregano, and thyme. Those can really help to keep bunnies and different types of insects out of your garden, and they smell really nice. And a lot of you said that you were here because you're interested in herbalism, so you can also use those. And like I mentioned earlier about finding out that for some of the erosion that we were dealing with near our creek, we were able to plant a lot of native plants like violets and ground ivy and asters. Again, if you are wanting to work more with herbs, there are so many options of native flowers that you can use to help with erosion and to try to battle the grass, which is what I'm doing right now, while also attracting pollinators and being able to harvest things for your family. There's so many, if you just do a quick Google search of what you can plant for erosion control, there's a lot of non-native things that are marketed to you that you can buy. So this kind of what we're talking about today, using a little bit more observation and intuition. There's so many options, so trying to make sure that you're choosing the more holistic option that's good for your entire homestead and not just a quick solution that you might be battling later.
Yeah, I have an example of that. One of my urban teachers, they have a creek and it has really bad erosion, and they planted bamboo there 30 to 40 years ago, and now it's taking over everywhere, and they have to fight it each year.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
Very
that's a hard
happy,
fight.
and that one is one that's heavily marketed towards people.
Yes, it is. I thought that was one that most people at this point had seen, like a crazy overgrown bamboo situation, but I still get a text every now and then from someone that's like, I'm looking for bamboo to grow for this, and I'm like, no, please don't. Please don't. Another interesting thing that I've run into as a herbalist is I'll go to look for seeds online, and there's so many big nationwide seed companies, and most plants kind of grow all over the US, but there's different variations of them to adapt to whatever your weather is where you are. And if we're just kind of buying seeds from a big seed company, we might be growing a variety of a plant that we want that grows well in California and not here. So that's why co-ops and seed exchanges are so great, but also looking up seed companies from your area, which this event was great for. There was at least 3 seed companies that were from here in Kansas. For me, I purchased from the Southern Seed Exchange and a few other just southeastern seed companies, but that is huge. If you have tried growing medicinal herbs, also foods, and you feel like you're not good at it, or it's just not working for you and you're wasting money, that could very well be why, because that was our issue for a long time. And then I started looking up what potatoes grow well in this region, what types of lettuces grow well in this region, and that does a lot better for you. So just as we would do that with our food and medicinal herbs, it's a good idea to do that with pretty much anything else. I don't know if this is something that you all deal with here, but Nashville is a really big city that's close to me, and it's been a very long time now, and they are starting to do some things to go back and battle it. But their original kind of landscaping plan for the whole city included male-only trees, and so there's just buttloads of pollen all the time, and there are no female planting trees to help with that pollen issue. So people come to Nashville or come to the South and they have allergies for the first time in their lives and they're not sure what to do about it. So that's a really big example of kind of how much of an impact it can have to just throw things in the ground that look pretty without really researching it. Now we have like whole organizations paid for by our government in Tennessee to battle that. So it's a problem. A lot of times too, when we're purchasing a new house and a new property, like I did a couple years ago, we are coming into those problems that other people have done. So we have a lot of non-native trees and bushes on our property that we're having a really hard time getting rid of. And they're beautiful, and I'm sure that's why they were planted, but it's rough. So one really cool topic is that plants have been adapting long before civilization forced them to. And so what that means, I have a really cool example of what that means. Is anyone familiar with elderberry and elderflower, that plant? So it's a pretty popular one. A lot of times when you're first learning about herbalism and foraging, you'll read in a lot of places, make sure that you're not harvesting plants within 25 or 50 feet from a roadside. And that's because of pollution and, different toxins and stuff from cars and all that stuff. So there is a lot of truth to that. However, plants adapt as we do, and so we see a lot of plants in those areas like railroad tracks. Elderberry in particular does really well in areas that are difficult to live in. Like we see dandelions and sidewalk cracks. We see mullein and thistle and elderflower next to railroad tracks. So a really cool study was done about 5 or 6 years ago on elderflower that was growing near roadsides and heavy pollution. And what they actually found was that the elderflower growing in that area had less pollutants and heavy metals than elderflower growing in a much more rural area, because the elderflower had developed protected constituents in it that combated that pollution. And so they actually found that by ingesting the elderflower or elderberries that were growing near roadsides, you were getting those benefits as well. So there's a lot of cool plant adaptations that do come from us and all of our building and cars and all that, but plants have been adapting to so many other things before that as well, like animals that, maybe their food source ran out and they were turning to new food sources. So another really fun example of that is when COVID hit and they were doing research for the vaccines, they started researching a few plant groups. One of my favorite is the Artemisia family. Sweet Annie ended up being a big one that they found. And what they found that was so cool about this was that viruses change, right? We all saw that with the COVID. They put out a vaccine for one thing, we get another type of COVID, you have to go get that one. The cool thing about plants is that they can adapt as the virus is adapting, and they can literally do that in your body. So one of the books that was being sold here by, he passed away last year.
Stephen Harold Buhner.
Stephen Harold Buhner. If you want a really easy, simple guide for herbal antibiotics and herbal antivirals, Stephen Harold Buhner. Buhner or something. He writes about that and about studies done even longer ago about how antiviral herbs are able to adapt as viruses adapt. And viruses are all around us. They, some of them haven't been activated yet. It's kind of similar to mold. And so working with herbs for viruses is incredibly beneficial for that reason. I made an antiviral tincture that had Sweet Annie and Oregon grapefruit and a few other antiviral herbs in it. And people would always ask me, oh, do I have to take breaks from this so that my body doesn't get used to it, or that it doesn't, get weakened by the virus or whatever? But the answer was no, because plants are incredibly intelligent. The other thing that I love that's kind of on that topic is that for every illness that's out there, there is a plant, not just that can help, but literally outside right now that can help. So that's the benefit of learning what's growing around you, what's growing in your yard, is that a lot of times you can just go outside and grab it. That's one of my favorite things to do, especially because when we're working with fresh herbs, there are so many parts of our biological makeup that are missing those constituents in those plants, whether it be the astringent properties or the bitter properties. There's so many parts of plants that used to be in our foods before they were modified to be more tastier, more juicier, more colorful. And as I'm sure most people that are here are aware of, that has led to a lot of different illnesses and a lot of different struggles in today. So incorporating fresh things that are growing outside in season, even if you're just nibbling on like a pine needle or some lemon balm or honestly even a piece of grass. It is fresh, you're getting the nutrients from the soil, you're getting so many good things from that that are just like waking up the cells in your body. What was it that I wanted to say about that though? So if you are learning what's growing outside in your area, a really cool thing to do, kind of going back to what I said in the beginning about witnessing the cycles of your land or a local park near you, is making a little log. If you're interested in identifying plants, whether you just like them or you want to work with them, keep a little journal. There's so many cool ones out there for farmers and herbalists focused on that, but you can also just use a notebook. This is what I found in January, even if it's just 1 or 2 or 3 things. There are also so many herbalists out there today that a lot of herbalists in your area, I know if you're from Kansas, my friend Farai over here, she is a teacher and she has a Patreon, and what's really beneficial about that is getting to see in real time what plants she's finding and what she's working with. That's kind of the beauty of having so many teachers today. Of course, like I said, books, classes, all those things are amazing, but there is nothing that's going to stick in your brain more than learning it right when it's happening and when you need it. So that's kind of the beauty of having someone local to you that's a resource that you can learn that from. Having a field guide, so I'm not sure if the book that Farai recommended earlier is set up like a field guide, but I know that, what is the classic Peterson? The Peterson field guide makes field guides for every single region. So if you are interested in identifying trees, plants, birds, literally anything, there's a Peterson field guide for it. Just be sure to get it for your specific region, because like I said, even though a plant may grow here with you all that also grows with me in Tennessee, it probably looks a little different because we have different climates and different elevation. So that's the benefit of getting a field guide for your area. It's super fun, especially if you have kids, to take pictures of plants or maybe even snip one and press it in a book and then go home and try to identify it. Even if you're wrong and you just write a few things that you think it is, it's often helpful to reference that later. So anyways, creating that log, the real intention behind that, besides it being really fun, is that even if you've had a month where you're not spending a lot of time in your garden or on your land or outside walking, you can flip back to that and see what was growing this time last year. And maybe you have a cold and you're looking for something to reach for and you're like, oh crap, I ran out of my elderberry syrup or my cough syrup. Then you can start to know what to reach for. For example, right now, there's tons of ground ivy growing outside. It's a beautiful ground cover with like a lilac purple flower. And in Tennessee, we have wire-leaf sage growing right now. I'm sure you guys are about to get it. I know I saw it here last year. Both of those are amazing for colds and coughs and allergies, runny nose. They help dry things up. And there's so many good things for that to grow in the winter, but we all know this time of year when we're starting to get rain again, a little bit of like a cold can come back in. A lot of people are experiencing allergies, and you can just go outside and grab those plants when you need them, which is amazing. Another example is in the winter, there's less plants out, there's less fresh vegetables out, and we're eating a lot of like heavy kind of meat and potato stuff. And in spring, we're starting to change our diets. Everything is starting to change based on what's available, what's growing. And coming out of that can be a little bit hard on the body. Really, any transition can, whether you're moving or you're experiencing a seasonal change or a hormonal change or anything at all. Plants can be very helpful at like carrying us through that and helping us to adapt through that. So the first plants that we see in the spring that you all might be familiar with are like chickweed and clavers, lots of little spring greens, and all of those plants that pop out for spring are really amazing for getting your lymphatic system moving. They're mild diuretics, which help carry toxins out of the body. They just like help get your blood and everything moving, and that's exactly what we need when we're coming out of a winter. So these are all just examples of the beauty of the cycles in nature and how there's truly always something that we need outside when we need it. And getting familiar with them before you need it is very beneficial. These types of traditional indigenous tending practices have proven the test of time, withstanding resiliency to a constantly changing environment. Humans have hunted, gathered, and generally managed significant resources for thousands of years despite large populations and constant fluctuating environmental conditions. When we view these things through the lens of ecological resiliency, the traditional tending practices can inform current land use policies and development of indigenous land management systems that promote restoration and resiliency. Something that I find really beautiful about that is if you are in kind of the foraging and wildcrafting community, or you're reading about it, learning about it, there are some people that have a kind of fear-mongering mindset of, you know, don't take too much, or the plants won't grow back. And of course there is a level of truth to that. We never want to be selfish. We never want to over-harvest, even in our own gardens, because we don't want to let things go to waste. But as we talked about with plants adapting with us, there really is so much to go around. And a really cool study that was done on sweetgrass showed that in our native territories, sweetgrass grows more than anywhere else, and yet it is used way more than anywhere else. And that is an example of plants that truly just, they want to be harvested by us. Willow is another great example. When you're mowing your lawn and you have that weed that you really don't want and it comes back even stronger, that's another great example. So a lot of plants are truly here to support us and adapt with us. Well, I hope that this class has offered you some new perspectives on how walking your plant path, whether herbalism or farmer, with reverence for its roots and an observation of ethnoecology is not only critical to learning, but a valuable tool to ensure ethical practices and good stewardship of land and people. All right, well, thank you, folks.